Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of Airway Mapping Made Easy, the video tutorial series where I share how to convert a CT thorax into a hand-drawn airway map for bronchoscopy. I'm Pip, an interventional pulmonologist from Woodlands Health, Singapore, and before we start, I would like to thank you, my viewers and subscribers, for your support. It means so much to me whenever I receive messages that you have found the videos helpful, and it encourages me to continue making more videos even when I feel like giving up. In today's video, I'll be taking you through an airway mapping using multiple reconstruction views to tackle more complex branching patterns. If you find it challenging to follow along this tutorial, please feel free to visit the other videos on my YouTube channel to review the concepts of airway mapping. And do like, share and subscribe to my channel for more upcoming video tutorials. Today's case is a 74-year-old gentleman who was admitted following an infective exacerbation of COPD, and he was found to have a lung nodule on chest X-ray. He has a previous history of tuberculosis treated more than 10 years ago, with residual scarring and calcified granuloma in the upper lobes. Here we see the CT thorax, which was performed. Apart from the scarring, it also shows a speculated 2.7 cm lung nodule, with tethering of the associated fissure. The images of the CT are as shown. Please take some time to review the CT images and to identify the location of the nodule. To recap, this is our framework on the 5 steps to airway mapping. We will go through this together, step by step. The first step is to locate the lung segment in which the lesion is located. Take a moment to rewind the video if you need to review the CT scan and lock in your answer. Yes, it is in the left lower lobe, specifically in the LB6 segment. We can then go on to the second step, which is to find the appropriate CT reconstruction. The challenge in this case is that the ostium of the LB6 initially travels in the anterior to posterior direction. But the airway leading to the nodule makes a turn to travel in the medial to lateral direction. We can conclude that in order to view the tubes as circles, we can use either the sagittal or coronal views to help us visualize the airways, or both in tandem. A quick revision: if the airway travels in the anterior to posterior direction, as shown by the straw in the left-hand image of the teddy bear, using the coronal view will help us to see it as a circle. And if the airway travels in the medial to lateral direction, using the sagittal view will help us to see it as a circle. I'll now show you the CT scan in the axial view on the left, with the CT scans of the coronal and sagittal reconstructions on the right. We start by scrolling down the axial CT to locate the nodule and the LB6. Usually to orientate to the bronchoscopic view, we will then flip the axial CT horizontally to match it. We can then scroll down the coronal CT until we find the line which intersects with the LB6 in the axial view, as shown over here, and this corresponds to the LB6 on the coronal. We can do the same with the sagittal view to scroll down until we locate the LB6 and find the line which intersects the LB6 in the axial view, and we can now go through the rationale behind using the coronal view and the flipped sagittal views. During bronchoscopy, to enter the left lower lobe LB6 segment, we take a left turn at the carina, following which we depress the lever to look upwards, and we move in the anterior to posterior direction into the LB6. The teddy bear on the right mimics the position of the patient during bronchoscopy, with the scope moving in this direction. Because of the direction of the movement of the bronchoscope in the anterior to posterior direction, as shown, this would actually be the view we see upon entering the left lower lobe LB6 segment. The teddy bear on the right mimics the position of the patient during bronchoscopy. We now see that this is the same as the standard coronal view, hence no flipping or rotation of the CT is required. Since we know that after entering the LB6, our bronchoscope will continue to follow the airway to the nodule in the medial to lateral direction. We can hence continue to use the sagittal view to help us to view the tubes as circles. This would thus be our expected view on bronchoscopy with the spine posterior and the heart anterior, correlating to the CT scan, the flipped sagittal view with the spine posterior and the heart anterior, which is the same orientation as our bronchoscopic view. In summary, for the left lower lobe LB6, we have to use the coronal and sagittal CTs, and we orientate the CT image to get the coronal and flipped sagittal. We then match the direction of CT scrolling to the expected movement of our bronchoscope. For coronal, that will be in the anterior to posterior direction, and for sagittal, that will be from the medial to lateral direction. We are now ready to draw our airway map. We start at the ostium of the LB6 in the coronal view. Take note we are scrolling in the anterior to posterior direction. And we see that the airway first splits like so, left and right. And we can see that there's a smaller left hole and a bigger right hole. Now paying attention to the flipped sagittal, we can see that that's exactly what happens as well. Where the intersection of the line occurs, it is actually splitting into a bigger right hole and a smaller left hole. And we know we have to follow the bigger right hole on the coronal view. Here, we go back and focus our eyes again on the coronal view, following the right hole, which corresponds to the right hole on the flipped sagittal. I will first move the flipped sagittal so we can see the subsequent view. And we see in the coronal that it actually splits at an angle as such. The angle of the branching is in this direction, with a hole at the bottom and a hole at the top. And if we pay attention to the sagittal, this is exactly the same angle which is shown, like so. And in this case, we know that we have to follow this hole on the top, which corresponds to this hole on the top on the coronal. As we continue on the coronal, when we see this configuration at the top, this means that the hole actually splits in this direction, left and right. And if we're not sure, we can simply follow the hole on the sagittal view where we see that it splits in this direction and exactly at the same angle as we expect to draw. And so we can draw it like this. And we know that we have to follow the right hole. Continue to play through the CT, we see that the right hole follows on. And looking at the sagittal, the right hole should lead to the nodule. There is a very small subtle split of the right hole up and down, but it's not easy to visualize and it doesn't quite matter because we know that both holes will lead to the nodule. If you're finding it difficult to visualize this specific split on the coronal view, this blue circle and the red circle indicates the initial split, and the red circle and the red tube indicates the subsequent split. Teddy bear helpfully demonstrates this as the two red circles, so you can see how the airways will appear. We can now compare our airway map to the bronchoscopic view. I'll first show you the LB6, as indicated by my laser pointer over here, and the rest of the lower lobe. And as mentioned, we usually turn left and move in an anterior to posterior direction within the LB6. Once in the LB6, we can then begin to follow our airway map. As shown, we see as expected, it splits into a smaller left hole and a bigger right hole, and we know we have to follow the right hole. and the angles are exactly as we have drawn. Following the right hole, we can already see that it will split up and down in this configuration that we can draw. And following the up hole, we can see that it splits left and right, which is the configuration we have drawn. At this point, because we're using a bigger scope, we're unable to pass the scope in any further, but that doesn't really matter as long as we enter this hole on the right. As we know, the subsequent split inside will both lead to the nodule. We then move on, using our 1TH1100 scope with a 3mm working channel. We use a K203 guide sheath and a 20R radial mini probe to localize the lesion. With a nice image on the radial EBUS, and the nodule is clearly visible on fluoroscopy. When we know that the lesion is quite proximal, i.e. not beyond the 5th generation airway, we usually like to use the larger scope with the larger guide sheath so that we can introduce the standard size biopsy forceps to take bigger samples. And in this case, we proceeded to perform forceps biopsies of the nodule. The patient was diagnosed with TTF1 positive non-small cell lung adenocarcinoma. Systematic mediastinal screening showed enlarged station 7 lymph nodes, but biopsy showed no malignancy. However, this patient was also diagnosed with high-grade myelodysplastic syndrome, and he decided for palliative treatment for both his lung cancer and MDS. Thank you very much for joining me on today's tutorial, and I hope it clarifies how you can use multiple CT views to help you draw more complex branching patterns. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Do message me if you have any comments, queries, or suggestions for future videos. I'll also be happy to discuss and help draw any cases if you would like to send me some CT videos. Please do like, share, and subscribe to my video tutorial series so that you won't miss out on another episode of Airway Mapping Made Easy. Thank you.